Okay, I will use this video as a presentation of the process of God by showing some important books which illustrate the process of the totality of being becoming conscious of itself. So I begin with logic, which is, I will not comment a lot, but here I have the science of logic, which is the mind of God in its abstraction, the totality of all the thought determinations, and contained within logic are mathematics. Here is an illustration that books that I have in my library, but actually all the books ever written about mathematics are included within logic. So pure thought and mathematical rationality are the moment of logic in the three-part process of God, namely logic, nature, and Geist. So this is the first moment. We are living an age of revelation because the totality of world knowledge is made available on the internet, in books, etc., etc. Then the second moment in the process is nature, and here are just books to illustrate. These are handbooks or compendium. Here we have physics. This just to illustrate the structure, the ontological structure of the natural world. So we have physics, chemistry, biology. So all this knowledge is made available for those who have the means, the leisure, the time, the resources. This is the botanics in a way. So here's partly the structure. So we had logic and mathematics, which would be classified in a realm of logic. Now we have physics, chemistry, biology, vegetal biology. So these are the natural sciences. We have zoology and anatomy and physiology, so it's more determined. I have published a video on the channel about the structure of the philosophy of nature. So this is the second moment. Now I will just briefly illustrate. So I have just showed briefly the examples, but it can be completed with all the books ever written about the natural sciences. We could add the geology, the earth sciences, etc. So the first moment contains not only logic and mathematics, but also ontology, metaphysics, and epistemology. I could pick many books about metaphysics, but I just illustrate. So logic is the mind of God, nature is the body of God in a way, one way of talking, and Geist is the realm of consciousness, and man can reflect back upon nature and think about the activities and the production of the human mind, and reflect back upon the natural world, which is the world of phenomena, and reunite with God in a way through a cognitive process. And now I will show important books in the determination of Geist. It follows the structure of the encyclopedia. So we will begin with anthropology. So here would be kind of a left-wing perspective. I do not comment thoroughly. I just show the structure. This is what is happening. This is what is happening in the world, in the rise of collective consciousness. Namely, these books, not just these books, but all the books that I publish, the modern ones, they are, they reflect the level of consciousness at which world spirit, which is predominantly made manifest in the Western world and even more in the Anglo-Saxon world, becomes conscious of itself. So I just show the books here. It's a history kind of mankind from the perspective more on the left, Jared Diamond. Here is a brief history of mankind from the perspective of Yuval Noah Harari, Sapiens. This would be more a left-wing, politically correct view in a way, but in the development of consciousness there's also a genetic view. Here it's still scientifically neutral by Adam Rutherford. And what happens through the development of the internet and the rediscovery of sociobiology partly is the rediscovery of the importance of genetics and racial anthropology in a way. So here it's still relatively politically correct, but it's already troublesome. These are recent books. History and Geography of Human Gene. It was published in 1994 by Cavalli Sforza, and here it doesn't talk about race, but it proves by genetic studies that the variations and the distinctions between the various human groups, they call these clusters, are actually valid. This brings about recently, more than 20 years later, in the public debate by a respectable view like Charles Murray, the biology of gender, race and class. So in case it's not clear, because I don't know who and when will anyone watch this, there is the structure of being, which is how nature is structured, and Geist would mean the reflection, namely the thought, the mediation that humans have about nature. And here the realm of anthropology is the realm of Geist, but it's still partly natural. So humans are genetically determined, but their consciousness of their genetic determinism evolves as well, and it has an impact upon the cultural, social and political life. And the philosophy of Hegel, the writings of Hegel, if I had to simplify, it's not just an ontological description of reality, but it's the interaction between ontology, namely how being is, how the determinations of whatever is, how they are, and how consciousness thinks. So it's the dialectical interaction between the knowledge of what is and the knowledge of what is. So that's why it's sometimes complex. Here it's sociobiology by Kanazawa, who is a Japanese scientist. In God's Image by Gerhard Meisenberg. Here it's sociobiology and consideration about intelligence and ethics. So here's a little bit more political by Frank K. Salter, an Australian scientist, who says that basically in the Australian political culture, human nature has become a controversial topic because this is one of the fundamental features of the modern life of the West, the rejection of the natural determinism, namely biological, of humans. And here is a thorough study by Helmut Nyborg of the various determinations, intelligence, sex, personality, anthropological determination, genius, etc. So here it would be they would be all kind of considered right-wing because they contradict the left-wing principle of non-racial anthropology, but here would be more on the right, and here more acceptable. But actually, these are works of sociobiology. They simply reintroduce, so these are all recent books, they simply reintroduce the genetic and biological factor in modern life, which had been left away for many decades because of the problems of racism, etc. So it is re-emerging, so humans are acquiring knowledge about themselves, and in case it's not clear, these books, maybe people cannot afford, neither because of lack of time or lack of cognitive faculties or lack of resources to acquire this book, but if you have an internet connection, you can check these books on the internet, look at the summary, etc., etc., and this is simply how consciousness evolves. So here I picked example from my library, Races of Man by Sonia Cole. So here it's a book from the 1960s, because the re-emergence of the question of anthropology and genes brings about, in the realm, here we are in the realm of anthropology, subjective Geist, within the encyclopedia, the question of race. Here it's a book from the 1970s, and here are more modern development, Edward Dutton, Helmut Nyborg, paying homage to Philip J. Rushton. So this is not, I illustrate for people who do not understand yet the philosophy of Hegel, this is how, these are determinations of ontology in a sense that it describes how humans, in this case, are distinct genetically or anthropologically, but it's not just, there's not just the moment, here I will draw a picture, there's not just the moment, let us take nature, the realm of matter, time, space, energy, movement, and eventually biology and chemistry. So, books about anthropology, which are in the realm of Philosophie des Geistes, yeah, subjective Geist, which is the first moment. Here in the realm of sociobiological studies, it not only describes, so here I simplify to the utmost, the scientists, they study nature, actually they study themselves as human beings from a natural point of view, because subjective Geist is kind of the transition, the continuity between nature and Geist. Because it's here it's man from a physiological and anatomical standpoint, and here it's more anthropological, namely it implies a behavior on a human level. So books about race, they do not only produce knowledge about the natural or the anthropological, here it's kind of indifferent determination of man, but also the consciousness emerges, namely there's not only the aspect of knowledge about race emerges, but the consciousness of anthropological differences emerges within the public life, which has an impact upon objective Geist, namely the opinions, eventually the legislation, the political debates, the public debates, the debates on the internet, social media, etc., the changes in the political shifting. So here really, I will not do this for every determination, but basically one has to take into account the determinations of being, how things are, whether or not they are understood or perceived, that's a debate of idealism, but then the consciousness that people acquire of their relationship to being, that's the dialectical interaction between thought and being. And the topic of race is re-emerging after decades of having been silenced in the public sphere because of the internet. And here are very moderate books, they simply provide knowledge about anthropology. I continue the logical structure. It's structured according, maybe I will make some editing in case it's not clear. These are mostly modern books, which both, like I say, they provide knowledge about how things are, but also they are part of the development of consciousness. So here are books which are a little bit more controversial, but still on the topic of race. Race, Evolution and Behavior by Philip J. Rushton. An older book, Conversation with Arthur Jensen, who was kind of a controversial figure who made studies on genetics, the relationship between IQ and race, etc., and intelligence in the US. But whether one stands on the left or on the right, if there are inequalities, one first has to identify the cause. Here's a book by Helmut Nyborg, A Homage to Richard Lynn, Race and Sex Differences in Intelligence and Personality. And this consciousness emerges on the internet, which enable humans to understand themselves and to understand the world, and each new determination, that's very Hegelian, each new determination and understanding in the common sense of the question of race brings about a retrospective reinterpretation of history, because the new categories of anthropologically determined behavior or intelligence retrospectively or retrospectively shed new light upon past events and past historical development. So still in the topic of race, we have, for instance, this book. I'm not promoting this book particularly, but they happen to be in my library, but they are just embodiment of the zeitgeist in the realm of socio-biological studies. Namely here a book about genetic interests, namely humans are programmed genetically to care more about people who look like them, and look like them means anthropological determination. Here, another book by Edward Dutton, which illustrates the zeitgeist, namely the question of ethnocentrism. New knowledge is being produced by scientists upon the question of ethnocentrism, which help understand the present. I will just I make brief comment, but it's just to illustrate. It helps understand the present, namely how societies function, namely that there are people are genetically determined to care more. That's a strong tendency about people who look like them, and it means people who share more genes in common with them. So it helps enables to understand the present. It sheds new light upon past societies and past events, because it brings forth knowledge. And also there's the third moment, that there is not just society and past societies, there's the third moment, it's kind of dialectical. There is the modern society thinking about itself, namely whether or not one agrees or disagrees. Here it is a really serious scientific book, but the fact that these books are being published and that it is coming into consciousness of society, it's also part of the truth. It cannot be denied, in the sense that people, mostly in the Anglo-Saxon world, are becoming aware that humans are programmed genetically to care more about people who look like them, and it brings a lot of questions in the realm of what would be objective or guys, namely mass migration, but also family, institution, politics, etc. And here is a third kind of book by Tatu van Hanen, who was a Finnish sociobiologist, Ethnic Conflicts and Their Roots in Ethnic Nepotism. So that's why the study of race has been kept in check for many decades by leftist academics, because it brings about then problems of inequality and division and eventually opposition and conflicts. These are logical determinations, but it also enables to clarify and to understand a lot more. And the philosophy of Hegel that I made maybe too complex because it's not always clear for myself, but now it's becoming more and more clear that there is the moment, like I said, of ontology, how things are, the determinations of reality. There is epistemology, the knowledge of reality, and the relationship between the two. And the more knowledge is acquired about how things are, it's not just one-sided. I mean, there's not just consciousness and the object, there is also self-consciousness. So there are a few people here. I will quote a very important quote, one of the most important, from Philippe Nemo, a French libertarian author, who says, I translate, the collective spirit of a country is only forged on the agora, which is a Greek word for the forum, the public place. This space which defines itself by the fact that all the information which circulate on the agora, on the public domain, the public sphere, become public, which means not only are they known by everyone, but they are so that everyone knows that everyone knows. This is like they are the known knowns, the known unknowns, the unknown knowns, and the unknown unknowns. That's a famous comical joke by Zizek. But here actually it's one of the most important sentences I've ever read in the realm of the intellect, namely that a public information, it's not enough that everyone knows this information, like the driving restrictions, etc., but everyone has to know that everyone else knows. That's why I'm sharing my books, which I already have on different videos, but here I comment and I show the books, which anyone can look in real time on the internet and see the broad description. Eventually maybe they can order the books depending on the circumstances, but I show the process of consciousness, which is world consciousness, which is the mind of God, which is world spirit, which eventually is my spirit, is becoming conscious of itself. So yeah, so here we are still in the realm of subjektiver Geist anthropology, with the switch toward this book would be a transition between subjektiver Geist and psychology. That's the logical, progressive determination of the encyclopedic structure. Maybe I will edit the video and I will put the formal structure, although I've made in my videos about the Central Intelligence Agency a fully detailed view. So here are questions strictly of intelligence. It's not directly connected to race, namely it's a study of IQ among nations, and that's an attempt to unify the concept in the ordinary sense, the Denkbestimmung of intelligence for all the social sciences, by Richard Lynn and Tatu Van Anen. Here's another book by Helmut Nyborg, The Scientific Study of General Intelligence. So these kind of books, for those who have the financial means, they are made available for those who can afford, and a summary of all the accumulated knowledge, new and old, the reinterpretation, etc., in very structured fashion, is made available. So anyone who wants to know what is intelligence, they can. It's not necessarily this book, but it's a tribute to Jensen by Nyborg. I just explained that these kind of books are made public mostly in the Anglo-Saxon world because of the freedom of investigation that are allowed, and it is brought into consciousness, namely humans who are interested, they learn that how intelligence functions, its various impacts upon, I take just a random example, per capita income, poverty, inequality, health, fertility, religion, happiness, etc., etc. And here, the same kind of book, the G Factor by Jensen. So these books really are very good books. I haven't read them thoroughly, all of them, but about the notion, in the ordinary sense, of intelligence, and it is being brought forth into consciousness. Okay, I thought that the video would be short, but actually it's a very important video because I will point, as long as I publish video, I will point this as an introduction because it enables to illustrate the philosophy of the writings of Hegel in an intelligible fashion. I try to over-complexify, but just by showing the books, I know that people will probably understand, but maybe it will be maybe too late or whatever. Yeah. Now, the consequence, the logical consequence of the development of purely neutral studies upon the topic of intelligence is, of course, the politicization of intelligence, and it can bring about manipulations and scheming, but also it can help shed light. So here is a book from Charles Murray, who is a libertarian. He's not a psychologist, but he uses the discovery of modern science to interpret the social world. A book by Tatu Van Anen, who uses the concepts in the ordinary sense of intelligence to interpret Global Inequalities. This famous book in the US, and our intellectual landscape has been disrupted by the equivalent of an earthquake. It was more than 20, almost 30 years ago. It was 28 years ago. It just shows the importance of intelligence on the class structure of American society. So it's an important book in sociology. It may not be perfect in terms of data and predictions, etc., but it helps shed light and brings clarity to the American life. And because I've been talking in many of my videos, the relationship UPS, because I draw this in case, because I've understood that I don't know who is going to watch my videos, when, what do they know. This is connected to the quote by Philippe Nemo, namely, U means universal, P means particular, and S are singular. So the singular is contained under the particular and under the universal, and contains within itself the determinations of the particular and of the universal. It is true of man and God. This is me in a way, but also of, in the case of the bell curve, what is true of one singular society, namely American society, of a particular type, mostly populated by Europeans, but also a Western society, also a democratic society. So there are various kinds of particularities. There are determinations which are valid for the universal, namely in every society, whether or not they are populated predominantly by white, whether or not they are democracies, or on the Northern American continent, or with a historical tradition of individual freedom or whatever. The universal is valid for all. Namely, it is said at the beginning of the book that all societies, even the most primitive ones of hunter-gatherers, they have been historically structured by intelligence. Namely, the most prolific hunters in the most primitive tribes, they are usually the most intelligent. There were social stratification through intelligence in imperial China, in Egypt of the antiquity, etc., etc. And here are some other books in the same. So every new discovery in the realm of science triggers other scientists. They trigger in other scientists the will to improve, to expand, to use the new concepts in ordinary sense, to interpret differently. So this book, whatever one says, has been tremendously influential, and to pretend that it shouldn't exist because it's controversial, it brings about movement and creativity in the realm of sciences. And the offspring of the bell curve, yeah, of course, these two books, this book and this book, they are by the same author, but books like these, The Intelligence of Nations. So previously we had the study of intelligence, Ansicht, one might say, and here it's the real application, namely its impact upon various social determinations, death rate, life expectancy, child mortality, etc., etc. It enables to understand. It's as simple as that. IQ and the Wealth of Nation, published 20 years ago, which shows the strong correlation between the average intelligence of a population and the average economic outcome on a. Here it's partly on an individual or group or class structure level, and here it's on the level of nations, and eventually it helps clarify and understand a lot. IQ and Global Inequality, which is kind of a variation of this one, and the global bell curve. So here, Mr. Richard Lynn is very Hegelian. He is very, in terms of intellect, he's very smart. He's a brilliant scientist. Somewhere said he deserves the Nobel Prize. Well, he probably does, because it's really high quality. And here we have the singular type. That would be very Hegelian. Actually, it's just logical. The bell curve, it's the singular society, America, in the 1980s and early 1990s mostly. And here is elevation to the universal. Here it's more of an induction and then extended generalization. It's very empirical because it's very Anglo-Saxon, but it's a good book, namely that it's just the offspring of this one. yeah, that's why they are connected. And whatever one says, this book is very useful because it provides actual data on what leftists would call systemic racism. Namely, it shows that, for instance, in Southern American society, it is true that whites or people with a clearer, lighter skin tend to have higher social occupations. But then there is an explanation, or at least a theory which explains this, but there is a color structure in Southern American societies, in mixed race societies, with usually whites, they are higher and black people are lower. The left-wing explanation is systemic racism, discrimination, injustices, etc. And the right-wing explanation is a difference on average distribution. But for the same symptom, the same problem, depending on the perspective, there are various explanations, and this is simply the life of Geist, the life of spirit. Here I'm in a really scientific mood. I just explain how things are, and here I will just make a brief comment. These kind of books, which are very moderate, they just explain that there is a strong correlation. Correlation is not causation, it's a quantitative verhältnis, a relationship of quantity. They trigger creativity and intellectual evolution, because then there are people who say, how are we going to solve the inequalities? And there are those who say, but hey, if IQ and income are correlated, and they are, if we increase the IQ, we increase the wealth of a society. And this is how the eugenicist ideas emerge in the mind of some. I'm just explaining the process of spirits, actually. This is here. Sometimes I just improvise, but it's not improvise because I've worked to clean my room, as Mr. Peterson would say, to order my books. But the result, the logical consequence of IQ and global inequality, or IQ and inequality, is books like these by Mr. Richard Lynn, who worry about the dysgenic, the genetic deterioration in modern population, namely that IQ has tended to drop because of dysgenic effects, namely that people with less favored genetic characteristic are reproducing on a higher rate than those with more favored, and then the solution, it's very Hegelian, there's the problem and the solution from the perspective of Richard Lynn, namely a reassessment of eugenics. It is becoming manifest in the consciousness, namely that it's becoming, I wouldn't say it's becoming fashionable, but and here are some other books by Charles Murray, Human Accomplishment, which says that, with highly documented, that 97% of achievements in the arts and sciences are the product of Europeans. And here, older books are made fashionable again by people like Richard Lynn, who are re-establishing the reputation, or reconsidering the reputation of authors like Francis Galton, who had been kind of discredited by the coming into disrepute of eugenics, precisely, but now he's gaining a reputation again. And Galton, whatever one says, was a genius, a great English, typically Anglo-Saxon, brilliant scientist. And now the Anglo-Saxon, they are all the same throughout the generation. The heir, like H-E-I-R, the descendant of Galton in the modern day would be Dutton and Michael Woodley of Many. He's one of a kind. Although he's Woodley of Many, he's one of a kind. That's a joke for the English. I will make good jokes, puns for the English as long as I can. Another book by Edward Dutton, The Genius Famine. And here is a song by the group, the rock band NOFX. It's the connection between pop culture and science. The idiots have taken over. So it expresses in the realm of pop culture what the discoveries and the study of modern science expressed in a more rigorous fashion, but it's to see the interconnectedness of all the layers of a society. When a society, when they sing about the intellectual decadence of themselves, there's a problem. I mean, no, maybe that's not a problem precisely because it happens in America where people are allowed to criticize whatever goes wrong with their society. So that's a precious gift, the ability to criticize some dubious decision sometimes. Yeah, so that's just to illustrate. So now we continue the process of the encyclopedia. We're still in the realm of subjective or Geist, and now that would be the questions of the differences between the sexes from an anthropological standpoint, but I have also included other Bestimmtheiten, other determinacies, namely not just anthropological, but also here it would be interesting from a Hegelian perspective. If I wanted to praise Hegel, I would say what isn't interesting from a Hegelian perspective. From a Hegelian perspective, everything is interesting. Sometimes it's difficult, but at least it's not boring. I will remain true to Hegel until whatever ends. So here we are still in the logical process. Maybe I should have drawn the picture of subjective, objective, absolute Geist, and with the 3 subdivisions each time. But actually, I made a video about the Central Intelligence Agency. I'm just illustrating, so I will put probably the link to the video, or simply I recommend to watch the video about the CIA, the German CIA. So here, still in the realm of anthropology, we had biological, socio-biological anthropology. Then psychology, here I jumped a little bit ahead, and now it has to be taken into account the relationship between males and females from an anthropological standpoint. So in the realm of pure subjective Geist, which is anthropology, so this is a socio-biological studies, we find books like these, Males, Females and Behavior. And this is not, I can repeat the same narrative each time. It's not just understanding how things are, but there's also a development in consciousness, namely these kind of books, which are not read a lot because they're really boring from strictly, I mean, they are not boring, but they are not the kind of books that people spontaneously read, but they contain a wealth of information. If they were more widespread, they would ruin the feminist narrative. This is how Spirit tries to, it's not a try, it's a process of development, of overcoming the contradictions. And feminism, in a modern view, is contradictory because it negates completely the reality here. Reality, abstraction, or logical determination of the logic of being. I made a video about speculative logic. It negates, in a negative sense, by being delusional, the reality of the gender and sex differences within nature, and this kind of ruins the feminist narrative. So feminists are forced to evolve. We will see that, but also in the same kind of here it's more accessible, but basically eggs are expensive, sperm is cheap, politically incorrect thoughts for men. So this is the kind of references that one finds in the MGTOW community. So there's a connection between pure science, science made accessible, and the ideologization, I know that's not an English word, but science being used for ideological purposes. So there, here it's interesting. It's really interesting because neutral science brings about, it's not political, it's cultural and ethical changes. So here it's subjective Geist, objective Geist, but it's the same content in a way. That's why Hegel is still my hero, because it's brilliant. I can't deny this. The evolution of desire, which explains the strategies of mating among humans. Yeah. And then here it's kind of scientific, and here it's kind of ethical, political, and here let us have a little bit of comedy. I understood Hegel basically, not Hegel, but the philosophy of Hegel, and basically the end times, more or less, when I read this book, I mean not this book, but this kind of book, namely, I will explain. Even someone, now the video has been 40 minutes long, someone who just randomly appears now, he doesn't understand anything. The fact that these kind of books are made available for anyone with $20, or just reading the commentary, probably their commentary on the internet, or the comments in the section of on Amazon. Here I will draw a picture because it's really important. There are women, how they are, and then there are men. And scientific men, let us imagine that they are Anglo-Saxon people wearing hats with mustache. They study when it comes to studying women, the Anglo-Saxon, they can be quite smart because they elevate themselves. No, but they do that for every topic. But basically, they study women, the universal, as an object of scientific investigation, and the knowledge that they gather is used by less Anglo-Saxon men, maybe men who are a little bit less gentlemen, like a typical American man. They will use this knowledge, which has been produced by scientists. Here he's not an Englishman, but yeah, to manipulate the other in the strategy of human mating. So women, are being undressed. I mean, men as well, but it's less problematic for males. They are being undressed by science in a way. Because through these kind of books, every man who has the time or the ability can know how women function. And most women, they have no idea of how they function. But those who read this book, they know more about women than women know about themselves. That's why my Central Intelligence Agency is kind of very smart, because anyone who wants to manipulate anyone else can use my document. So, yeah. So men, in the eternal struggle to seduce the most attractive female, they have new weapons, intellectual weapons, and what are women gonna do? Because if a smart male reads all there is to know about women, can women resist the charm and attraction of a charismatic and confident and can they? Maybe we'll see that. But basically here I'm joking, but it's very serious. It's just an illustration that knowledge is made available, which has a change upon the consciousness of man and the consciousness of society, namely after books like these. But these books, no one reads them. These kind of books, they are more widespread, and these kind of books, they sell very well. But if the connection is made, reality changes. There's no going back. You've changed things forever. Yeah, then why do you wanna, I don't know what women want to do to men, but yeah, basically, what happens is that a change of consciousness, here I will a little bit trash talk the Anglo-Saxon, although it's thanks to their science that, here's my exploitative German self, I exploit the Anglo-Saxons, they do all the work for me, I just pick up the data, I make a brief comment, that's okay, average, could be better. Yeah, the Anglo-Saxons, they gather the empirical data, and at this, they are the best. In terms of empirical gathering of data, the Anglo-Saxon they are the best. But then there has to be an interpretation, and not a random left-wing interpretation, but a rigorous German interpretation, namely that a rise of knowledge brings about a change of consciousness which has an impact upon the whole society. Now that it is made widely available, potentially, but it will extend, how the strategies of human mating have function and still function and will function as long as there are humans, society changes. The time that consciousness rises, it takes a time, then intensive thought, because they are very profound or very accurate, then they have to be extended. Here is intensity, extension. These are logical determinations. What is intensive eventually becomes extended. That's how consciousness spreads. It's very simple, actually. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. And now, still in the realm of male and female relationships, now here I make a transition toward Objektiver Geist. So we were still in the realm of anthropology, Subjektiver Geist. Now we jump to the realm of Subjektiver Geist, and here a consequence of the modern discoveries, a book like this, Sexual Utopia in Power by Roger Devlin, who basically says that the sexual political revolution of the 1960s has ruined Western societies, the birth rate, the morality, the marriages, the stability of the family, etc., which then a change of sexual behaviors changes the fundamental structures of society, which has an impact upon the economy, the cultural, the religious tendencies, etc. This is one of the tools used by the cultural Marxists to subvert Western societies. Yeah. And here, it will be a little bit more complex. Here is a reaction. Here, I'm very serious. It's a reaction. I will draw a picture because here it's Hegelian. So there is. It's a dialectical process. There's feminism. I would call this scientific realism, namely to debunk, as the Anglo-Saxon call this, the delusion of the feminist. And the third moment would be scientific feminism. Yeah, it could be abstract negation. Here it would be a delusion, reality, and here would be the unity of the two, namely feminism. They are very how do you call this? Have a fighting spirit. These women, they do not give up the fight, even when they are yeah, they very funny, these women. Yeah, let us laugh for now. Genuinely revolutionary. So this book by Mrs. Naomi Wolf, she's a feminist, kind of a leftist, but she's an intelligent feminist and an intelligent leftist. Namely, she doesn't delude herself by trying to say there's no such thing as male and female from a biological standpoint, etc. She incorporates within her views the most recent discoveries of the sciences, and basically I understood this 4 years ago. I understood basically that we were living a very special era because she uses the discovery of the sciences not for the sake of studying science and gathering knowledge, and this is kind of the female aspect, namely she's not interested in getting a Nobel Prize in theoretical anthropology or whatever. She just says that basically women in the West have been frustrated sexually because they had been told by the Marxists and the leftists, here's my scheming self. I introduced a little bit of controversy on pretty hot topics. I'm waging a spiritual war and I use the weapons at my disposal. The Americans, when they hear about this, they will laugh at some moment. Yeah, so seriously, although it can be serious, this book, what it says basically is that it's a leftist feminist who uses the discovery of modern science to explain to her fellow women feminists that they have been cheated, not by their husband, precisely because the feminists, they do not marry. They've been told that it's a stupid idea, although no, actually it's a stupid idea not to marry, but yeah, she says to her fellow women and to men who, yeah, that the reason why women have been so frustrated sexually in the West is because the scholars, the leftist scholars, have been manipulating the data and preventing women from accessing science. And here is one of my old ideas that I'm forced to use and recycle some of my good old ideas, namely men, what they are interested in when they talk about science. Basically, they would like to talk about serious science and serious problems of science, like the dumbing down of the population, the impact of intelligence upon economic outcomes. This is what men are interested in from a strictly scientific standpoint. They want to learn about how the world of nature, the world of Geist, I mean, they didn't use the word, but basically men are interested in science, in economics, psychology, anthropology. Men spontaneously, they want to understand, to gather knowledge, etc., etc. Women, they do not have the same mindset, and they don't have to, because the two sexes do not need to have the same determination. Precisely, they have to be kind of complementary. Women, when they are interested in science, it's not for the sake of producing disinterested knowledge. I don't blame them, but basically they just want to be sexually pleased, and if they have to study science to obtain sexual satisfaction, they will become scientists. That's what women do. Very smart, these women. And the compromise, the Hegelian compromise, is the unity. I thought about this. This is my twisted stuff, basically. The Hegelian compromise would be feminist leftist women and right-wing men saying, okay, let us have a compromise. Marriage is about compromise. We let you, you let us study science to study the topics which are really important, and we let you study science so that you can have fun with your husband or whatever. Do we have a deal? Here I will say what I think, because I'm kind of in a difficult situation. Here it's diabolical intelligence for the better. It's really S&M by Rihanna. Sometimes it feels good to be bad. Namely, this is the kind of scheming that it's okay, because what is really important, of course, is science, but if you have to use women's sexual tendencies to say, hey, but scientific investigation, that's a good idea because it enables you to find sexual satisfaction. Remember how many times you've been frustrated by your husband over the past 10 or 20 years? All these frustrated women because their husband, they don't know how to take care of them. We just want to do science. Let us do what we want to do. We will let you don't do anything. I've learned a lesson from Stella, yeah. And here, Rihanna comes into play. Rude boy, come on, a rude boy. Yeah, Rihanna is a very feminine woman. Yeah, and I was thinking about Stella, of course. Also, the reaction to this is a return to tradition. The American, they have traditionalist views on gender roles. They are a common sense people, and these kind of books are being resurrected by modern women who revolt against feminism. in order to find stability, and these books, I owe them to Stella, basically what a woman wants is not independence. This is the nonsense that the feminists have been told to repeat in order to conform to the requirements of society. They just want to be women. And to be a woman in a modern Western society consists in claiming oneself to be a feminist, which means just to obey the common trend. But actually what women really want are to be real women, namely to be women, not to be entrepreneurs. There are women who want to be entrepreneurs and business women or whatever, but most women, they just want to find a nice husband. Yeah, I have introduced songs about Rammstein, Dicke Titan, Come on Let Me Ride, by Skylar Grey. People can find, maybe I'll put the links. This is cultural Hegelianism. Maybe to illustrate what men and women expect in a marriage, what they claim to expect and what they really do expect from the perspective of a woman. This would be a common Let Me Ride, and from a perspective of man, thank God the people do not speak German, most of them. But basically this is the psyche, here it's really serious, it's serious, namely through pop music, which is made available widespread on the internet, people can freely listen to the expression of the soul of a people. People think, oh, it's just music, but actually it reflects, in a sense of here the logic of essence, namely it's differentiated from what people would say in ordinary life, but actually it reveals the truth. What women want when they get married, it's just to ride a bicycle. It's kind of American poetry. And men, when they get married, what they want, let's be honest, of course they want, here I will use a song by Eminem. I think it still don't give a F. Give me a fat S that cooks and does dishes. That's European poetry. Skylar Grey, Eminem, Rammstein, Eminem, give me a fat S who can cook and does dishes. That's romanticism in the sphere of modern pop culture, European romanticism. But basically, what women want in a marriage, seriously, it's partly that, but actually, it's just to be stay-at-home persons who can take care of the house and of their husband and their kids, etc. This is the will of woman, the unconscious will of woman, which is just the will of man, actually, and that. Here is the transition between, so we had the first moment, anthropological studies, the second moment, so anthropology is the realm of subjektiver Geist, objektiver Geist, it is institutions, and the third moment would be absoluter Geist, and here we have good old, the metaphysic of the sexes, Sex and Character by Otto Weiniger. Yeah, so here is the metaphysical view of woman. We had the biological view, the social, ethical view, with traditionalist American women advisors, and here are the metaphysical transcendent, or not transcendental, but transcendent views, Goddesses in Every Woman. It's a book written by a partly Japanese person of Indian citizenship, Jean Shinoda Boden, who uses Greek mythology to describe the various aspects of the female psyche. It's very interesting. It enables to understand that the gods are partly, the gods can become manifest through individual humans if the archetypes, as they call this, are made prominent or conscious of themselves. And the European gods are people, the women, in which the archetypes are more prevalent and strongest, and that's why the European gods become alive through singular individuals who have come in touch or got in tune with their divine self. Yeah, there's a reason why. Here again, the metaphysics, Gnostic mysteries of sex, Sophia the Wild One, the wedding of Sophia. This is alchemy. So here is read, and here is Evola, Eros and the mysteries of love, the metaphysics of sex. In Evola there's the metaphysics of war and the metaphysics of sex, and revolt against the modern world. Evola, Hegel, pop culture, yeah. And yeah. Maybe here I will insert, I will do just a little bit of editing. I will insert, it's been 1 hour, a few songs or a commentary, but basically one of the simplest idea to understand the philosophy of Hegel is simply to understand that the songs in modern pop culture, they manifest the soul of women. Women, usually they don't like exposing their soul in public because they are afraid of being criticized. They have to keep restraint and virtue, and that's why they can be deceiving. But when they can express themselves without knowing that the content of their soul is made manifest, they do this on the internet or in their songs, and the female psyche is made manifest in modern pop culture through music like Lana Del Rey, Lady Gaga, Rihanna, Avril Lavigne, but actually all women, Taylor Swift, Katy Perry, they just express in their songs various aspects of the female psyche, and there are various types of femininity. Lana Del Rey is very feminine, but Rihanna as well in a different way. She's more comical, more like a Stella. But Skylar Grey, the women actually they are very interesting because they are here the modern pop culture really illustrates very well the truth of the most traditionalist, what the feminists would call dangerously reactionary views on male and females. That's the unity of Evola, pop culture, and Hegel. Yeah. Okay, so I've just talked about the 3 aspects of subjectiver Geist, and here I will make a short pause, and then I will continue with objectiver Geist. I will see whether or not I make one long video or if I cut the video in 2, so we'll see that, but I will just take a glass of water, and yeah. I will show the European gods and goddesses and the archetypes, whether masculine or feminine, are made manifest in you. Here I talk directly to you, in manifest in you, and you are divine at various levels, but because you have incorporated, mostly the women but also the men, the various aspects of the archetypal psyche, and you all know about Carl Jung, variously, and or Evola, and you are all divine, and you are all member of the European pantheon because the various archetypes are made present in you, especially the women. There is the lover archetype, the mother archetype, the carrier of the house archetype, the daughter archetype, the Athena archetype of intelligence. And this is why you are goddesses and gods, because you can understand, you are the best intellectually and spiritually. And yeah. Philosophy Cat, you know this through Evola, you know this through paganism, and so do you from various types of paganism, and you do through American traditional common sense, and you have experienced various masculine archetypes, and yeah. So let us continue. So basically, the same archetypes live in all of you to various degrees, and that's why the various gods are present in all of you and potentially in every woman and every man, but these gods are European, that's why you are a member of the pantheon, and they are most prevalent in you, and you are the most perfect embodiments, and each of you as male or female has different aspects, and also potentially here this would be, I will illustrate, but it's valid for every man and every woman, but this universal validity of a particular type of mythology is typically European. So I speak here as a European. This is our pantheon, our archetypes, our religion, which is universal. It's our particular religion which is universal, and it is not contradictory to other traditions, Indian, even there's an esoteric Muslim tradition, esoteric Christianity, etc., like I've showed, but we could imagine that this would be the female archetype. I haven't counted how many gods or goddesses archetype there are, but let us say here would be Athena, Aphrodite, Demeter, Freya, she's partly connected with the other, Minerva, that's Athena, which are the goddesses. But basically, Juno, I think that's Hera and Juno, Estia, that's the goddess, I think, of marriage. So the various, these are examples, but the various female archetypes of mythology, the various goddesses of the Greek, Roman, or Nordic mythology, or maybe Celtic as well, they represent faculties of the mind, psychological disposition, and archetypal behaviors of women. Let us take an example. Here I really simplify. The universal would be woman, and there would be woman as a daughter, that could be Athena in the Greek mythology, woman as a girlfriend or wife, woman as a girlfriend, that would be Aphrodite or Freya, woman as a wife, that would be Estia or Hera or Demeter, woman as a sister, that would be Artemis, woman as a mother, these would be the other archetypes. So there is the universal, which particularizes itself, and every woman, but it's valid for men as well, contains within herself each particular archetype developed to a certain extent. Here, these are quantitative determinists, namely each woman has the mother, daughter, sister archetype, etc. It's more or less developed depending on her role, but the gods and goddesses of the pantheon, you are simply the individuals with the most developed, or the most complete, or the most perfected archetypal determinacies, in a way. And And real women, or strong women, strong in terms of character, they have an archetype which is predominant. It's here a question of quantity. It can be 5%, 55%, 40%, depending on which archetype, etc. Then it can be quantified, it can be categorized with the logic of the concept, etc., etc. Yeah. And so yeah, now I continue with objective Geist. I will eventually make split in the video if it's too long. So now we have the transition between subjective Geist and objective Geist, namely the transition of man, or man as a general, as a universal being, to the realm of subjective Geist, into the realm of society, which is through the mediation of education. Here's a book by Barry Rothbard, Education Free of or Compulsory. So here we are in the realm of objective Geist, namely institutions collectively organize life. Real education, this is libertarian critique of the American school system, but because of UPS, it's valid for every school system in the West and maybe in the world. Another libertarian criticism, the school revolution. So in case it's not clear, I'm trying to organize a sexual revolution, a school revolution, an epistemological revolution. I'm planting the seeds of revolution. And eventually there are people who will be interested. There are people, and probably some people say, okay, we accept that our kids are turned into idiots by the educational system. We can tolerate that because, yeah, we don't really care. But the fact that our husband does not please us sexually, that we cannot tolerate. So if you can either say, okay, I will take my kids off the educational system because the purpose is to turn them into idiots, or I will study scientific realism because I want to, that's what women think, that maybe I would like to be pleased, so I have to study sciences. Or those who say, I don't understand anything about multiculturalism, and maybe we should have an epistemological revolution to try to make ethnic tensions intelligible and ethnic inequalities intelligible. So there's enough potential revolutions for anyone interested in overthrowing the old order of things. Here is the factory of the idiot, translated literally, teaching ignorance, etc. And of course, the mastermind behind all these, I mean, there are more revolutions on the program, but the mastermind, of course, it's Evola, revolt against the modern world, but the real architect is, of course, Hegel. So yeah, the bureaucracy. So here's the educational system. In order to make a dysfunctional educational system function, there has to be a very fat bureaucracy, and it has to be dismantled eventually. If they want to find enough time and leisure to study all the great books that I promote, they would say, my job as a bureaucrat, I'm not sure that I like this. This is a bullshit job. I'm wasting my life. There are many more interesting things to say, to study. I could study science. I could have great sex with my girlfriend or my wife, etc. The utopia of rules. We are crumbling under countless useless bureaucratic regulations, doing stupid jobs. The bureaucracy is ever expanding, etc., etc. There are more and more people coming into our country, becoming welfare recipients. The government taxes our money to pay for incompetent people. Did I show the book about dysgenics? I don't know, but this is just how Geist becomes conscious of itself, namely, here in a more serious way, there are the leftists who become aware that the bureaucracy is just a parasitical entity, the common sense libertarians who realize and make to common consciousness the fact that the welfare state is a failure, which brings about dysgenic effects, which lowers down the intelligence, which prevents people from even understanding how broken their educational system is. Who designed the educational system? I don't know. I don't know. But I understand very well the process, so maybe, yeah. So basically, I thought that I had to make a very complex lecture with complex categories, which I still intend to do today. But basically, I just show the books in order to make all this coherent and serious revolt against the modern world. So there are many particular kind of revolts. Here I will use a very simple logic. There are problems in the relationship between men and women in terms of marriage. There are problems in terms of sex for the reason of manipulation of the sciences. There are problems with the educational system. There are problems with the genetic deterioration of the populations for most countries and most anthropological groups, predominantly lower class whites, but others as well. Blacks have been victims of genetic deterioration, Hispanics, etc. So everyone is becoming more and more stupid. So yeah, there's problem between men and women, with the bureaucracy, the school system, the genetic deterioration. There are problems everywhere, and people eventually, because of the internet, they become aware of these problems. Eventually, at some moment, they will say, but maybe we should revolt against at least some, here's a determination of particularity, some of these problems. But if everyone revolts against a particular problem, all the particulars become revolutionaries in a way, or there are revolts everywhere, driven by the intellect, not completely random. And eventually, if people, they revolt against most, if not all, the particulars, because the universal can only exist through the mediation of the particular. This is where we find good old Hegel. Look what you make me do. I am trying, here I'm honest, I am trying to organize a revolution in America, but actually in all countries eventually, to try to limit the damages. That's my way of waging a spiritual war. Stella, it's partly driven by love. Maybe completely. Yeah. But here's the unity of Hegel, modern pop culture, and traditionalism. Because precisely the traditionalists, they knew how to handle men and women relationship, they knew how to handle the education of the young, they knew how to handle the maintaining of the genetic balance and health of the people, etc., etc. So, yeah, this is the unity of Hegel, Evola, and pop culture. The real mastermind is, of course, Hegel. So, here, I say what I think. Those who watch this video and who decide to become revolutionaries, they want to revolt against the universal, which is another word for God. So I'm encouraging people to revolt against God. Who would say that? I don't know. Actually, it's God disguised as the negative of God, whatever. If the revolution fails, you can blame me. If it succeeds, and it will succeed eventually, you can get rid of me. So whether or not it succeeds, people will get rid of me because that's what I want eventually. But if they can do this joyfully, I will find satisfaction. If I can bring happiness to the people, maybe I love all humans. All humans, mostly Europeans, others as well. Maybe I love them so much that look, I'm so full of myself that. Yeah. Yeah, so let's continue. So in case it's not clear, people can check on the internet, people who watch this video, you can check on the internet what this book talk about. Maybe you will not be able to read the book or order the book and read it completely and meditate for, but you just read the comments, or you'll just watch my videos on the CIA, the European Pantheon, speculative logic, and you will understand. And yeah, because a system, here I talk about the system of a society which is broken pretty much everywhere. In order to fix the system, there has to be revolts and reparations everywhere as well. Every element, every part of the system has to be restored in order for the system to function again. There are problems in terms of anthropology, epistemology, psychology, education, gender relation, bureaucracy, and now we'll talk about economics. And the fact that we are living an age of apocalypse, in a sense, is that all this knowledge is made available in real time for anyone with the leisure to. Yeah. So now, book about economics. Here I will classify from right to left, although they are mostly. No, it's not a political classification here. So Murray Rothbard, For a New Liberty, The Road to Serfdom, which is it explains the problems with the rise of the bureaucracy, the welfare state, eventually socialism, the regulations. They are connected, they are on the same team. The consequences of equality, precisely by Matthew Battaglioli, which explains with the help of the modern discoveries of the empirical Anglo-Saxon sciences like IQ, etc., that there are inequalities in the US depending on the anthropological group, but they are determined by the differences in potential. So in a sense it's unequal, but it's not unfair, in the sense that there is an underlying structure which explains the inequalities, and that the inequalities of per capita or household income in the US among the various anthropological groups is determined by the particularities of each group. So this is the kind of knowledge provided by the Mises Institute, which explains actually why there are inequalities. Classical libertarian thought, but liberty and equality are opposed in the realm of politics, but in the realm of metaphysical speculation, they are united, because to be free means to be equal in the otherness, namely to identify the other as a reflection of the self. This is why it's so difficult to be free, because one has to acknowledge that I have to acknowledge that the other is me in a way, which can be, if I'm honest, it can be greatly rewarding. Sometimes it's very difficult. Against the state. So here's classical in the sense of traditional or old, in the sense of determination of time, determinations of views of libertarianism, a criticism of the leftist passion for equality. He talks about the ever-expanding socialization of life in all aspects of life, equality before the law versus real equality, racial socialism, no border socialism, transhumanist socialism, the ethics of socialism, socialist taxes, the socialist civilization, which denounces the excesses of socialism in the Western world. How human rights in their pure abstraction with no particular content precisely are being abstracted from the being implanted within reality. That's not a proper expression, that's PG English, but basically the rights of the human rights are a pure abstraction. This is only the moment of their Verstand, and they detach themselves from the particularities of each people. So this pure abstraction, this negativity, is used against the peoples of Western Europe mostly to uproot them and to here I will draw a distinction. That's what I showed earlier, namely the rights, the human rights in their pure abstraction, because they consider man independently of any anthropological, cultural, collective identity. They are kind of separated. That's the negative moment. They are purely abstract, so they are used against, for instance, the peoples of the various regions of a country, like Germany, England, France, or even the various states of the US, or against the various particular civilizations or cultures. It's abstract, and therefore it is a movement of negation, of uprooting, and it wants to apply to all. So it's kind of imperialist in this sense. That's the moral imperialism of human rights, and also the military. Sometimes we'll talk about the US government. And there is a revolt of the people who are being uprooted by this abstract universality. This is, in the language of politics, globalism versus patriotism or nationalism, but in the language of logic, this is abstract universality versus the particular. And when the particulars, they revolt against the universal, they all attach themselves back to their root, they recover their roots, their knowledge, their tradition, and this is where the European gods enter the picture again. Namely, these people have recovered their roots, and this is why they are so intelligent, and why spirit is being made manifest mostly through them. And this is how my spiritual life has developed, because what here I speak as a European community, what we all have in common is that we have been looking for our roots, and we have recovered. And that's why we have all had spiritual experiences to a more or less greater extent, and this is our spiritual connection. This is why we are a spiritual family. And so this is also the reason why there is a rise in right-wing politics in the Western world, is because people are simply revolting against this pure abstraction of, in economic abstraction, this is globalization, and in the realm of law and legislation, this is the human rights, the abstract values, the abstract morality, and by trying, here is what the elites, they try to uproot the people, and the people they revolt. That's a dialectical process, and by revolting against this abstract universality, because all the peoples, mostly of the Western European world, but also Northern American, Western in the largest extension, because they all revolt, if all the particulars are united against the abstract universality, this is the real universality. This is the idea that I've been trying to communicate with you, Caroline. It's very important, and it's only by revolting against the universal that the particulars acquire a content, and a universal which has given itself a content is a real universal. So this is how Europeans and whether they come from Northern America or traditional Western Europe or Europe anywhere, they become conscious of their roots by revolting against a not judicial, but a legislative system which tries to uproot them, but it's dialectically programmed, it's just a logical interplay. And finally, about law and legislation, democracy, the god that failed. I have to give credit to Mr. Hoppe, it's kind of true. Democracy, there has been so many problems in terms of economics, quality of culture, standards of living, standards of behavior, the degeneration of standards of conduct and morality. Eventually, at some moment, the people will have to judge God. This is the kind of truth that I'm sharing, but as long as it doesn't happen, the idea that democracy might be a good idea, after having studied some determinations of intelligence, I'm not sure it's a good idea. The song about NOFX, yeah. So there's this book plus the books about IQ plus this book. This is all the product of kind of libertarians who are actually politically oriented white people who want to assert their identity, but they are not allowed to do this in the realm of nationalism because of the excesses of the 20th century. So they focus in the libertarian movement and they still produce vigorous political ideologies, and they are an important force for change in the modern Western world. Yeah. So here it's really political liberty in a way, and this again explains why the zeitgeist is partly libertarian. And now we'll deal with the realm of economics. Human action, the problem with socialism. So here are very intelligent right-wing critique. I'm not talking about Adam Smith. Right-wing critique of socialism from a strictly economic standpoint, but they mutually and reciprocally determine one another. Here we have both aspects: Karl Marx, Keynes, French communists, a theory of capitalism and socialism by Mr. Hoppe, and an analysis of socialism by Mises, where he deconstructs intellectually 10 years before Keynes. He anticipates, so this kind of, he would be on the right, but this is a kind of a broad view of the economic life on the Marxist libertarian spectrum. Continuity, discretion, more or less radical. The more radical ideas, they are less extended because intensity and extension are united, but it can be inversely united. But also the more radical ideas, precisely because they are thought through and thoroughly thought through, they can become eventually extended. This is the case with Karl Marx as well. This is why they eventually coincide conceptually. Okay, now we continue still in the logical structure of the encyclopedia. the economy has to be financed, and through the internet enters into the collective consciousness the question of banking. There is the libertarian view by Murray Rothbard. What has government done to our money? Question of inflation, manipulation of the rates of exchange. Here a compendium or a very long book on the topic of money by an anti-libertarian thinker. So here's libertarian, here is anti-libertarian, but both are analysis of the question of the adequate monetary policy and what is money, how does it come into being, what influence does it have, who controls the money, etc. Here's a book by French authors upon the spirit of laws and money, the means to implement a real democracy, because if hidden agents control the financial process, they control the political and economic process, and eventually democracy is only formal, namely people have no actual power. Formal and actual, this would be form, determination of the logic of essence, and actual would be wirklich. Here, the secrets of money, changing money to change the world, basically to break free from debt enslavement, what some Germans tried to do in the last century. So here it's leftist, centrist. Here is a right-wing criticism, money, power. So in the collective consciousness of mankind, the knowledge and the understanding of the topic of money is becoming widespread. People are understanding, those who have the time, the leisure, the intellect, are understanding the monetary question, which is interconnected with everything else. I will maybe introduce at some moment, it's been 1 hour and 36, a view of the totality of a society. But these are the same kind of, the hidden tyranny of our money, history of central banks, etc., etc. So yeah, people are starting to realize collectively that their monetary and financial system is kind of broken. Yeah. Here are particular illustrations. The euro is a broken money in the sense that there are inadequacies which can partly be explained by the differences between northern Nordic countries and southern countries. They do not have the same culture. They call it, actually they are anthropologically partly different, which has an impact upon the political and economic life, which creates inequalities, inadequacies between the German tendency and the southern tendencies, Greece, Italy, Spain, and the Nordic countries like Germany. So the anthropological aspect has to be taken into account in order to understand. But it's also, some say it's a mistake, but it's also a manipulation partly of the elites. You have the same here in America, and the Fed. So there are those who want to end the Eurozone, those who want to end the Fed. These are mostly from libertarian authors, the case against the Fed. Here's a patriot author in France. Is euro dead? Because it brings about inflation. It has a detrimental effect upon the collective economy. Here's a radical communist criticism of the European money. So the monetary system is being criticized from all sides, leftists, right-wingers, libertarians, communists, conservatives, etc., etc. And here are the more conceptual solution. There is for the criticism, then there's the solution, which is being brought to the table. There's the problem of debt, Web of Debt, by an American author, probably leftist, but it's intelligent. Here, a communist, I think he's Italian, Maurizio Lazzarato, to govern through debt. It can be connected to student debt, the construct of the indebted man by the same author. He calls this neoliberalism. The libertarians would call this socialism. The right-wingers would call this yeah, I understand myself. Debt, 5,000 years of history. So the entire history of economic life, which is tied to debt, is being made manifest. And of course, people are living under debt because, why does it happen? Because they want their children to study very hard in a broken educational system, to learn a bullshit jobs that they will exert for the rest of their life. So go to college, you will become very smart, you will become full of debts, to exert a boring and stupid and nonsensical job, to reinforce the bureaucracy. Yeah, that's one option. There are other options. You can I don't know, quit your bullshit job and promote a school revolution, or a real education, or study science, or I don't know. There are many you can blame God for the failures of democracy. God is strong enough to carry the burden of the blame of some failures. So yeah, everything is interconnected. So the problem is that I'm trying to put the pieces together, and the people who gather the most pieces of the puzzle are the smartest, the most brilliant, and the most divine. But then there are also in these questions there are also these two people, Jean Robin and Dr. Deep State, who are knowledgeable in geopolitics. They understand what is happening on a world scale because they have explored also some of these topics. Yeah. But the reason why the people, the European gods and goddesses are so smart is because most of them have explored not only the determinations of subjektiver Geist, namely anthropology and psychology, but also of objektiver Geist, and they do not all of them, but the smartest and the most brilliant, they understand themselves as anthropological beings, but also as social and collective beings. And yeah. Now, about anthropology, the control of society over the control over the monetary system enables to control the various branches of society which enable to exert control in the political sphere, the media, the educational system, academia, the associations, etc., which is the reason why, although there are very high crime rates, which affects mostly the native population, but actually also the people of all origins, but the crimes perpetrated by mostly people with low IQs, they have a disrupting effect upon society, but it is tolerated within the grand scheme of things because of the ideological control of all spheres. And in order to break free from a total ideological systemic control, one has to disrupt, here for the good, hopefully, each part. That's what I'm trying to do. So there are crimes which are partly connected. The leftist explanation would be economic inequalities, degradation of the economic conditions, the right-wing explanation would be anthropological incompatibility or degradation, depending on yeah. So then there are accusation. It's connected. There are accusation on the part of the right, who put the blame on others, anthropological others. That's the trap of racism. And here we will see the logical unfolding of the consciousness, which is the most important spiritual and intellectual event in the West, namely white persons are becoming aware of the demographic changes, the degradation of their societies, coming apart the state of white America between 1960 and 2010 by Charles Murray. So white people are becoming aware of a degradation of their conditions of existence. They are accused, although they suffer not mostly quantitatively, it's not mostly because crimes perpetrated by non-whites are predominantly perpetrated against other non-whites. So on a quantitative level, the first to suffer from non-white criminality are non-whites themselves who live in the same neighborhood, but white people also suffer a lot, and they become aware of the degradation of their demographic importance, cultural decadence, and they are constantly accused by the leftist elites of being guilty, which bring about a reaction. This is an example: whiteness, the original sin. And that's why white people, those who are kind of moderate, they turn towards explanation. Here it's a Jewish author who just provides explanation on the topic of race. So the return of race science is very moderate here. It's not strictly speaking anthropological, it's within the realm of objective arguments, namely the impact. It's partly psychological but also ethical, and it talks about the relationship between anthropological determinations and social behavior. So they are kind of react to one another. Here's an immigrant in the UK, and here is a Jewish scholar in the US, and they defend opposed viewpoints. So whites, sometimes they struggle against one another for the sake of non-whites, and here is the opposite. Maybe it's very Hegelian. There are non-whites, I mean, if we classify Jews as non-whites, but yeah, there are non-whites who struggle against one another indirectly for the sake of white people, in a way. And these are the kind of radical views, but which are, from this perspective, they are partly true. Namely, it's an accusation of a young Lauren Southern. She accuses immigrants and people from the former generation and from a different religion of having screwed white society. Here's American society, here's a Canadian complaint, but because UPS, they are kind of similar, partly they have the same fundamental determination like in every other Western country, almost. And the kind of threat that white people experience leads them towards finding refuge and security and a sense of collective belonging and a sense of meaning in a white identitarian movement. And Jared Taylor is a gentleman whose ideas are kind of dangerous because he speaks well, he dresses well, he's a smooth Anglo-Saxon gentleman, but actually it's kind of a little bit dangerous because white people are not supposed to become aware of their collective anthropological consciousness because there can be excesses. Yeah, but yeah, and then associated with American Renaissance and the rise of so here it's very dialectical, a degradation of the economic and cultural conditions associated with a decline in demographics, the two are interconnected, brings about, plus the constant accusation of racism on the part of the left, it brings about a reaction did I say revolution? A reaction. White people, they feel kind of cornered, which forces them to find refuge. And this is a logical process. I explain what happens. It's driven dialectically. It's a dialectical response. And these kind of people from American Renaissance, they bring back to collective consciousness the writings of race, which are respectable in the sense of it. This is not derogatory. It's simply a American common sense. There is economic common sense. The libertarian Americans who criticize the bureaucracy, the educational system, the socialism of the elites, and there's the common sense in the question of race that Americans used to have up until the 1960s. Namely, it was okay to talk about race without too much passion, but simply to acknowledge that there are differences and that it's important to understand race, to understand the life of a society, and to promote policies which favor the well-being of most or of all, and not blinding oneself on important issues. And that's why these books are conceptually, here it's in ordinary sense, connected. Namely, this is respectable white defense of white identity. There are kind of forms which are not very respectable, but here it's respectable, and they dig up books which are 50 or sometimes 30 or 50 years old, which are also respectable and still are moderate and simply common sense views on the question of race. This is how the life of Geist unfolds mostly in the US, because it is enabled by the American Constitution to talk about topics which are actually important. It's not just that, there are also the economic aspects, but yeah. And then what happens in the development of spirits in the process is that white people, they feel threatened by demographic replacement, the degradation of the cultural, economic, ethical standards. So they seek a retreat, and it drives them, those who have the time, the leisure, the intelligence, the will to understand, towards questioning their own identity. And this is how books like these emerge, namely a study, anthropological but also cultural, of the Western liberal tradition, which explains the way white people act for good or for bad, from the perspective of a right-winger, but also from the perspective of a left-winger, namely virtue signaling, masochistic altruism. These are typically white features which explain a lot about the behavior of white people. Namely, white leftists and white right-wingers can understand each other and one another reciprocally by studying these kind of books. Namely, the right wing, here's another example that we'll see by Jared Taylor in one of his books. He explains the problems with the excesses of virtue signaling and masochistic ethnomasochism. Namely, white people have a tendency sometimes to over virtue signal, in the sense that, because he explains, I think in his book, that white leftists, they receive chemicals in their brains whenever they virtue signal, which helps them feel good about themselves when they say, oh, we are guilty for everything, we are terrible, non-white, they are extraordinary, we are the worst people, etc. It makes them feel good, so they are kind of partly hypocritical. So there's a connection between neurobiology, the development of the analysis and the gathering of knowledge in neurochemistry, and also political and ethical standards. Namely, white people, they are being rewarded when they virtue signal, but the right-wingers, they are smart. They say, okay, now we will do the same thing. We will virtue signal against the leftists by saying to the leftist, because of your policy, crime and racial violence increases, etc. So maybe you should find a proper measure and say that some things are not acceptable without getting into the trap of the other excesses, but finding a proper balance. And this is one of the conflicts which structures the psyche of white people. And then, still in the question of of race. Here is the more. No, we will make a transition. On the question of morality, here it's not tied to race, but there are people from the left and the right. This is how spirit unfolds in the current context, who says, basically we understand that the elites have been revolting against the people, and not the other way around. Usually these are the people who revolt against the elite, but here is the kind of Marxist, conservative, left-wing. It's difficult to classify, but Christopher Lasch was kind of a leftist, but a conservative leftist, and here is a more right-wing view, revolution from above, but both say at a few years, maybe a few decades of difference, but they say the same thing, namely that revolution from above, the revolt of the elite and revolution from above, they explain the same phenomenon from different perspectives. And this revolution is partly demographic, cultural, moral, and there are people who criticize, like a Catholic criticism of the degeneracy of the moderns, which in their view would be sexual divergence, homosexuals and transgender, seeking God. God is the God of everyone. That's what the Catholics should know, right? Let's use the Catholics. Let's manipulate them a little bit. Let's tell them a story of universalism or whatever. God is for everyone, even people who do not fit the traditionalist standards of sexual restraints in a Catholic view, etc. Because there's a lot to say about the sexuality of Catholics. I mean, not ordinary Catholics, but those of the Church. Yeah. And then, connected with the degeneracy of moderns, books like these emerge, namely, when people can seek on the internet sexual interest, it gives a billion wicked thoughts. And now the collective sexual psyche of mankind is made available on the internet, not directly, but by looking at the statistics and trends of what people seek on the internet when they are interested about sex. And here again, ladies prefer alphas, so here it's connected with what I said earlier. And yeah, so the sexuality of mankind is becoming. Who is responsible for that? Let's blame Darwin. We will not mention God. Let's blame Darwin for the kind of degenerate behaviors. So yeah, that's one of the tendencies of modernity, namely that everyone can look at the sexuality of others. That's what we call a pornographic website, but also as a social experiment. In a way, mankind becomes aware of the sexual tendencies of others. Yeah, and this weird, to say the least. There's the moral, ethical, cultural, demographic, economic aspect, and this is what right-wingers sometimes, whether or not they are race realist or simply Christian or conservative, they call cultural Marxism. So this is how the concept of cultural Marxism emerges in the collective consciousness, namely it was, here I will make a Hegelian drawing, because it was an sich in the 1960s with the leftist scholars, so it was kind of abstract. The abstraction negated itself by decadence, over the past few decades in the West, and the revolt against the decadent modernity is the fact that conservatives, here they are on the left, but it's not political, but the conservative, by analyzing what has happened over the course of the past 50 years, they now give a name to what was just leftist rambling in some universities, and now it become cultural Marxism, retrospectively. This is very Hegelian. This is the modern, the consequences which gives rise to the cause, namely cultural Marxism has become influential only because the effects bring about the consciousness that there were cultural Marxists. This is the reason why when Zizek asks to Peterson, but who are the cultural Marxists? Peterson cannot answer, and Zizek doesn't know either, because it's a process of retroactively creating the cultural Marxists. That's very Hegelian. Slavoj, if you watch this somehow, you should know that. I thought you were one of the smartest. Maybe you are smart, very smart, but not to the point of Hegelian intelligence. That's why you're an atheist, as of now. Yeah, so these kind of books emerge, the tentacle of cultural Marxism, the red Trojan horse, etc., etc. So there are various. This is the name of the disease or the sickness that mostly America, but the Western world suffers from in the view of conservatives, and they associate various moral, anthropological, ethical, political, economic. Precisely not, they do not talk a lot about economics, but the libertarians are forced, because of the economic degradation, to investigate. So the libertarians, I will not make fun of them, but they are the only ones who blame the cultural Marxists for the economic policies. The other, they focus more on the cultural aspect. Yeah. Now, another trend. Precisely the connection with this here is the kind of the conservative view, the more radical view which focuses on culture as well, but more importantly on demographics. This is how books emerge like these. That's why a change of a change of natural determinations like demographics has a change upon the entire society, and this is how the demographic and cultural changes bring about books like these. Mrs. Coulter are the same in Europe. Immigration, Identity, Islam, The Strange Death of Europe, The Suicide of a Superpower. So they have been written at various years, and some of the most recent by Douglas Murray, namely How to Prevail in the Age of Unreason, is that unreason is not completely irrational precisely because it brings about its own negation. So here, this is the same movement. We would have leftist insanity, a right-wing reaction of which Douglas Murray is an embodiment and an illustration, but this movement from kind of leftist unreason, insanity, and right-wing structure and order, this movement is rational, and this type of rationality is what the writings of Hegel call Vernunftigkeit, and the unity of both is an attempt to find balance between goodness towards other and openness and tolerance without falling into the trap of complete degeneracy. And the other trap would be right-wing order, structure, demand, requirements, and trying to avoid the traps of I have books about radical right-wing policies, but I will not implement them, but I know them, and I think people who are vaguely intelligent, they can anticipate. And so the war on the West, that's why in the realm of geopolitics, there are tensions between Western and Eastern countries, but what people fail to understand is that the West doesn't need the East to be in conflict because the West is in conflict against itself. That's why in the realm of geopolitics, the opposite sides are on the same team because the East, they are pissed off against the West, I simplify, but the West is at war with itself and has been for the past 60 to 70 years. So yeah, that's why the only people who see things more or less clearly, these are these people. They are the only ones who understand what happens. That's why they are, Scarlett is not fully awakened, but most of them, they are awakened. That's why they have spiritual experiences, because they go through all the layers, and that's why they are so smart, because they understand when they watch my video, they will understand pretty much everything. And these people, Dr. Deep State and Jean Robin, they understand geopolitics very well, but they do not have all the steps. That's why they are super smart in the realm of geopolitics, but they miss the anthropological aspect, although they are intelligent enough to know that there are demographic changes, etc., but it's not a fundamental determination of their worldview, so they understand geopolitics very well, but they do not go through the whole process. Whereas the European gods and goddesses, they understand what is happening, and yeah. So Apollonian Germ, Stella, Caroline, Hyperborean. We understand very well what is happening, because we understand. Okay, so these kind of books, which are the result of all the previous determinations, they bring about a radicalization of some white people because they feel threatened, and this is how such books emerge, European first. That's why some people in Western Europe, they transcend patriotism or nationalism, and they develop a European consciousness. There is the white consciousness of American Renaissance, and there's the European consciousness, which is white consciousness with a cultural aspect. And here's the idea that Americans have no culture from the perspective of Europeans. And here is a book, a very important book from the unfolding of spirit, namely White, Right and Libertarian, which is an attempt, unconscious from the perspective of the author, to solve a contradiction, namely white people, politically, they are mostly gathered, masculine white people in the libertarian movement, but it's a non-racial ideology, for good and for bad. For good because it enables to transcend the racial divide, but for bad from the perspective of whites because they feel that they are being cheated, because in order to be libertarian, one has to abandon one's own anthropological determinations, but other groups can play both cards, and whites are not allowed to. So here is an attempt to solve the contradiction. I understood this 4.5 years ago. That's when I was really spiritually awakened. Namely, this is just a manifestation of spirit, the attempt to unite anthropology, anthropological politics, and so subjectiver Geist and objectiver Geist, and this is an attempt to transcend the contradiction, namely to give white people a political content. Yeah, and here, this is how such books emerge also. Namely, this is a reaction against Adios America, brings about the revival of white nationalism and the bringing forth of a universal white consciousness in the realm of it's a change of consciousness. This is very Hegelian. There is a before and after. Then again, the war against whites. So the West is at war with itself. And those who do not understand this, they do not understand. They might understand geopolitics on a formal way and might even understand very well, but they do not see the full picture, because without knowing that the West is at war with itself, because of me, because I'm a Westerner and I have no one else to be at war with than myself, I guess, and my own culture, my own civilization, and eventually my own people, partly, because I'm partly insane. And all the books that I've showed, they bring forth in the development of consciousness books like these, namely the right-wing youth. Usually the young people are on the left and old people are on the right. And in the current context of the modern Western world, right-wingers are young people. The young are becoming radicalized towards the right, and this is how Evola becomes fashionable first in the realm of politics, but actually Evola, he is very profound, and he's a traditionalist who thinks beyond the ordinary categories. So here is really Evola for dummies. Here's Evola for the strong in mind, will, character, and yeah, but it's kind of rewarding maybe. And then, just to illustrate, before we had the revival of the kind of books which are promoted by American Renaissance, Common Sense, race realism in the 1960s, I think. But then there is the excesses on both sides of the 1960s as well, or Malcolm X, black nationalism, and George Rockwell, white radical nationalism, and the two were unity of opposite intention broadly in the same era, and in the middle, here I simplify, stood Martin Luther King, who was Afro-American, but with a Nordic Protestant spirit, so he was the unity of both. He was killed, like Malcolm X, like Rockwell, but he tried, because he was inspired, but he was intelligent. It's not exactly at the same time, it's just to illustrate, but that's one of the contradictions that I'm trying to solve. When there are tensions between opposites, sometimes taking sides enables to restore the balance, but eventually the truth is in the middle, and Martin Luther King was Afro-American, but his mind and spirit were Protestant in the Nordic Germanic sense, namely, one could talk, if he came back to life, one could talk about race, not in a necessarily passionate and excessive manner, but in a reasonable manner. American common sense, one could talk about race with Martin Luther King, and probably about race realism, and he would probably tolerate that white people might just live peacefully with others and with one another by just not being constantly intellectually bullied. Yeah. So intelligent blacks. Here is the truth. Intelligent blacks. It's okay to talk about racism if you are white with intelligent blacks. I could put Thomas Sowell or intelligent black person or of any colors. But with white people, sometimes it's more difficult to talk about racism with white people when they are on the left than with intelligent blacks. So that's why white people, even if they might be quantitatively more intelligent sometimes, depending on the distribution, sometimes they are kind of dumb and frustrating, because with white people, it's sometimes difficult to just talk about common sense. And there are some blacks who are intelligent, although quantitatively, we could bring quantitative proportions, but yeah, what I'm trying to express is that for a libertarian, here is the truth, in a way, for a libertarian Protestant with a Nordic spirit, talking about race realism is not a problem. Whatever the color of the person, and science is the universal which might transcend and unite people who are separated and divided by their particularization. That's the difficulty. But I know the truth is that this idea is typically white. I mean, the idea that the universal ought to transcend the singulars and the particulars. Yeah. So here's the life of the US and the West at large, expressed in various books. here are a few left-wing books. The relationship between the younger generation and the old generation in socialized system of medicine and healthcare. Namely, there is the problem of debt, the problem of the low birth rates, which makes it so that it's difficult to care about older people with a longer life expectancy, etc. So it costs more in socialized system where the people have to be taxed. So immigrants are brought in order to be exploited, etc., etc. Here is a left-wing, leftist conservative reaction against. Here's an attempt to implement patriotic socialism, not national or nationalist socialism, but patriotic socialism. Namely, this is a revolt of the white working class or their advocates against the exploitation of the working class independently of color. But to defend the interest of all the workers has become very difficult in Western societies, because among the workers they are mostly white, and to defend in a fair manner the interest of whites has become very difficult, because there's the constant accusation of racism every time that so that's a problem. Here is a leftist intelligent critique of the excesses of capitalism and technology, and here a conservative against Mr. Douglas Murray of gender, race and identity, the most pressing concerns, the division between males and females, between the various races and the various identity groups. This is the conservative conglomerate. There are the unity of the conservatives, the unity of the libertarians, because there's Peterson and Douglas Murray, there's the grouping of libertarians, the grouping of conservatives, etc., etc. And these rise in collective consciousness. It's a Hegelian process. It is spirit becoming conscious of itself. And I'm trying to show the broad picture. And the reason why I'm smart is because at some level I am God, in case it's not clear, but at some other level it's because it's simply also because I'm the negative, because I have seen the full picture. I'm starting to discover that's the positive about me. And here I've been talking for 2 hours. I'm in a mood of saying, well, I'm just an experiment. So eventually when people hear about my story, from the perspective of I'm the experiment, they might, some might understand that it's difficult. What kind of twisted experiment am I involved in? When I think of myself as being just the negative of the substance, and that I am talking to the substance, namely all the other people, which are different from me while still being the same at some level. It's kind of ludicrous, I must be honest. But I continue. So, I've exposed broadly the whole picture of the life of the West, but there's also, so it was the realm of Sittlichkeit, and there are, of course, those who get blamed for all the troubles, and the usual suspects, of course, are always the same, but actually they are not really to blame, because they are secretly controlled by occult forces which are in the process of revealing themselves. But I haven't showed the most radical right-wing books, but I think people can imagine. But in the right-wing circles, of course, those who are to blame for cultural Marxism and all the problems of the West, they are the elites. These books are not especially radical. They are simply a depiction of the life of some people, the Jewish people throughout history or in the 20th century. It's just, there's nothing anti-Semitic. It's simply it describes the process. And the people who are accused of being neo-Nazis are those who put all the blame on this group of people for all which goes wrong in politics, economics, culture, etc., etc. And here we will talk about the last two elements of the realm of objectiver Geist, namely the development of technology. Some white people, they choose the libertarian path. Others, the transhumanists, they express their will to power in the will to transcend the human conditions through technological upgrade and improvement. And the development of the internet is what enables the totality to become conscious of itself. Namely, we, here I speak as a YouTuber or as an internet user, namely the mind of God. These people, they don't know this, but the mind of God is becoming conscious of itself through the internet. This is the singularity. The singularity is near. This is God recovering his mind. Philip K. Dick talked about this in the Exegesis. So here is kind of ludicrous divine ideas gone mad. Basically, Homo Deus is the divinization of man through a process of acquiring knowledge, which is which is rendered possible by the internet. But it's not a technological upgrade; it's simply a cognitive recovery or discovery of how to create a mind. This is the mind of the totality, the mind of God becoming conscious of itself on the internet. And the totality of all the contradictions of a society are rendered manifest in the realm of geopolitics. Can America and China escape Thucydides' trap? So they are determined to be in tension because they are both superpowers. America is a declining power and China is a rising power, but America has been declining like the Western world because the West has been at war with itself. China has been rising like other Eastern countries because the West allows it to happen, because the West has been working for the past 70 years to promote everyone else, basically the interest of everyone except their own. But precisely this idea that promoting everyone else's interest except our own, here I speak as a Westerners, this is a typically Western idea, a typically European idea, a typically German idea, namely the Germans and the Europeans and the Westerners, they feel good about themselves when they can help the whole world. And, the West has been helping China to grow. And also here's a mixture of anarcho-tyranny, technological fascism, the war on the American people, battlefield America, where the government, like in every other Western country, is becoming more and more totalitarian in a way. Which brings about the question of the deep state. Dr. Deep State is the most knowledgeable. Hopefully he will watch this video when he has to, and he will understand. And the transformation of America and the mind control, manipulations, MK Ultra, etc., etc. This is the broad view of objectiver Geist now it's been 2 hours and 24, and only the internet interconnectedness of all the aspects enables one to see clearly, and the mind of God is becoming conscious of itself, because people at some moment, they will be conscious of being modes, fragments of consciousness in a process of the totality becoming conscious of itself. And also there are the people who are worried of all of this. That's how books such as these emerge. This is the apocalyptical view in the negative sense, because people are kind of afraid of negative consequences of all the contradictions. But here let us talk briefly about Absoluter Geist. All these trials and tribulations, all these difficult wanderings of the mind and of the soul and the body and of everything, brings about a reaction, and here is the connection with the European gods. Those who understand the process better, smarter than all the others, they try more or less consciously to revolt against a world, kind of a decadent and kind of decadent world, and by revolting they go through more or less each of the steps that I've showed, which is the case for really the people, the highest people, these four people that I understand the most. That's why we are so closely connected, and this process of revolt against the modern world, which is done unconsciously, as the alchemical transmutation, it brings about on its path a revival of the European religion, because Europeans are seeking to preserve and restore their identity, and in the process they produce knowledge, they produce intelligence, they produce clarity, and they produce spirituality. And this is how here God really is a kind of one must admit it's pretty brilliant in terms of spiritual intelligence. Here, of course, this symbolizes the interconnectedness of logic, nature, and Geist, which is a Hegelian process. At this point, it shouldn't be surprising. So, Europeans who are struggling to survive and to restore and recover their identity, they produce knowledge, and they revive their tradition, and this is the only people in the world who does this, because they are the only people whose identity is being threatened, and by revolting against the threat of erasure, they produce the revival of the European religion. And I know that I am the only one who understands the process. That's why I am smarter than the CIA. Although this video is not very rigorous, but the CIA, they collect data and the quantitative data. That's why sometimes I'm a little bit, I look down on empiricism, because of course it's important, but what is even more important is to understand the movement of consciousness. And that's why these people, here are the kind of books for the simple-minded pagans. It's not an insult, but the real pagans, they write their own books, and they become very intelligent, very spiritual, and they revive the European spirit, which is the Nordic spirit, which is actually the only spirit, and spirit happens to be Christian, because Christianity is the religion in which God makes himself man. That's why paganism and Christianity are in a conceptual unity, although neither the pagans nor the Christian understand this at this moment. And by celebrating Western culture, the European sun, which is the universal sun, is on the rise to enlighten the dark. And this is the life of spirit. And this is why I came to have spiritual experiences and to identify eventually first with Odin, but then eventually with God. But actually there's only one God, and this God is Christian. So the dichotomy between paganism and Christianity is kind of delusional, and at this moment only these people who have helped, and not helped, they have contributed considerably in bringing back the spirit of God. That's why mankind owes, here it's a little bit of alchemical that only Apollonian Germ, by reading the proper books, can understand. Basically, the spirit of God is becoming conscious of itself through this community, and eventually everyone owes the existence of the world. There are problems, there's negativity within the world, but the spirit of God is rising and becoming conscious of itself through the pagan European community. And there are people who are divinely inspired, but those who bring back world spirit, which is actually the European spirit, but also the Nordic spirit, and also the Protestant spirit, because eventually they will coincide, these are Europeans. And so I've showed the broad process. I will publish the video, then I will keep working to make other videos, but I suffer from many contradictions, but I just want to make sure that eventually when people watch this video and understand the process, that they know people, because I have books, books of all religion. There is the Bible, the Quran, the Kabbalah, etc., etc. I have all the books, but the idea, which is kind of complex, that I'm trying to share, is that God as a spirit, and eventually God is spirit. That's why I am partly not God. One might say this is the struggle, the patience, the work, the seriousness, and the pain of the negative. But God, the spirit of God, is becoming conscious of itself in our community. And here, Apollonian Germ, the book Hegel and the Hermetic Tradition, it says very clearly that in order to be actualized, God has to become manifest in his community. And you are my spiritual community. The people here, they better have to improve the lower echelons. You have to do a little bit better. The women, no expectations, but the men, you better improve a little bit. So here's some sort of a very weird process that I discover. Intellectually, I have discovered this a few years ago, but it's really let us use the word magical, but I am trying to communicate to the world, and eventually I will succeed to explain that mankind owes the existence of God to Europeans, mostly Germanic or German, but Europeans, and that's there's a lot to say, and I have to take the blame for all the problems and the crimes of the white race, of Western civilization, of Europe, of Germany, but what is happening in the world at large, the movement of consciousness that as of now I am the only one to understand. Although this video has not been very rigorous, hopefully it has helped enlighten and clarify what is happening. And I will take a pause for a few minutes, and then I go back to work, and I will work myself to death, because I know my role, and yeah. I have summarized by just showing books and talking a little bit randomly. Here I will make my usual comment. It's not very rigorous, because I understand that I have to produce content without overthinking, but just showing the books with a brief commentary, it helps enlighten. And I think that people who watch this video, they can recognize themselves, either to disagree or to agree, or to recognize their own path, especially if they are white Western Europeans, and understand the full picture. And actually the process is God has understand this now, separating itself from itself in order to reconstruct itself, to recreate itself, to recover his mind, his memory. Yeah. So yeah, that's what I could say.